Hello, my name is Rachel Norris, and I'm in this video tutorial going to show how to make this lovely crown connector encrusted with pearls and crystals and seed beads. And here I'm hanging my royal bee design from it, and I've got multiple strands of pearls attached to the multiple connection points on this little crown. So it's a great connector for that point of view. So you can hang loads of stuff from it and strand loads of stuff from it. And the bee here actually is shown in a separate tutorial booklet, which is available on Jewelry Maker. It's one of my booklets. It's called the Royal Bee booklet, and its code is HXTY29 if you want to order that to make the full design. Okay, so we'll get on with the tutorial now. Here is the crown connector that we're going to make today. You can see it's got lots of loops for hanging and attaching pearls from, and here I've attached the lower loops with jump rings to the golden bee. And it's a fantastic design as a connector in itself. You can have lots of little drops hanging from it and can be made in all sorts of wire tones and with lots of different gemstone colours in there, but I love the pearls and the crystals in this one. Right, the tools you'll need are, there's not very many tools actually, so you'll need chain nose pliers, which are these pointy tipped pliers with a fine nose, nice flat surface for manipulating the wire into shapes, and round nose to help you form the round shapes with, again, a nice fine tip, and flush cutter pliers for cutting the wire and creating a nice flat flush cut to your designs and no snaggy bits. You need a steel block to hammer the wire against, and the hammer I'm using is quite a small faced one. This is like a 2-ounce hammer with a small smooth face for hammering the wire against, but you can get away with bigger hammers if you like. And this hammer helps to flatten and create a lovely reflective surface, and hardens, sort of forms more connection with the atoms in the metal, so it actually gains more sort of strength of the bonds and keeps its shape for longer. I also used a ruler to help me measure out the wire, and a sticky bead mat, which is fantastic. This one is from Beadsmith. Stops the beads rolling about. Here you go, I've got some of the beads ready, that just helps me measure out lengths and things like that as well when I'm actually making the necklace up. So moving on to the ingredients. Here are the ingredients for making the crown connector. It's pretty similar to the Royal Bee actually, so if you've got that kit you can work from that. I've just added an extra pearls, because an extra strand of pearls in fact actually, because I've got a double strand coming from the connector. But basically you need 7 to 8mm diameter round pearls, and I've try and get them as round as possible, in fact, so they fit in nicely into the connector. If you don't have those, use round gemstones or round shell pearls, but real fresh water pearls are beautiful. I've also got some 8O galvanized gold seed beads. They Mayuki, and they're really lovely, and they add that bit of sparkle and fill to the wirework designs. I've got some 3mm diameter AB coated round faceted check crystals. I've got the code number if you need them, DPZV70, and the galvanized seed beads were 891052 and QBBD29. And there's the pearls as well that just show you how nice and round they are. They're really nice ones, because the rounder they are, the better they fit into the design. And moving on to the wire, in the Royal Bee you also used 0.4mm wire, but for this connector I've just used 1mm wire, a little bit of 0.8mm wire, and 0.25mm wire, and this I've done in champagne gold tone. You can use gold filled if you really want to, which is beautiful. You can make it up in silver, you can make up in the gold tone, all sorts of, even copper would make a beautiful crown. So so you can see I've done this in the beautiful champagne gold. So let's move on to the templates. Here is a template you're going to use to make the crown, and there's frames of different sizes and colours in the diagram. There's a ruler here so you can print it out to size, and you can screenshot it to do that. Just make sure your 7 to 8mm pearl or your gemstone fits inside that larger section of the lobe. And there's 5 frames, 2 of which are the same. So the main frame in blue is the main crown frame using 40cm of 1mm wire. And then there's a green frame with the central detail frame using 25cm of 1mm wire, just like that. And then there's a crown band detail frame in purple that sits inside the blue frame. That's using about 14cm of 1mm wire. And then 2 smaller 0.8mm wire, about 10cm lengths, make these side details that sit in mirror image, these crown band details, and they sit side by side within the band. Take the main crown frame, take a 40cm length of 1mm wire and clamp at the midsection with chain nose pliers, just a little way along the tip. And then I'm just going to push and bend the wires upwards to make the central portion, and check against the diagram that's the right size and reshape if necessary. Then just shape along the diagram a little curve to make one of these little upright lobes. And then what I'm going to do is quickly bend round this top section, and you can use round nose pliers to make that rounder. So I'm going to take it off the page. I'm just going to make sure that's bent outwards a little more. Insert the round nose pliers and make a tiny loop at the top, pulling the wire around the round nose pliers tightly and clamping fairly near the top of the pliers, checking against the diagram that the loop's the right size, and then flare the wire outwards by gripping near the base of the loop and pulling the wire outwards to make that first little loop. Check it's in the right place, and then bend a bit more firmly outwards, and then shape around this side of the loop to form the outer side of this loop. Then clamp sideways to form the base of this loop, making sure it's in the right place. To make the bend sharper, just clamp either side of the bend, and then I'm going to make another loop and then come back to you to show you the next stage. I'm actually going to continue just to make this little lobe so you can see what I'm doing. I'm just scooting around, so following the little line, making quite sharp bends here right outwards. I'm just going to take this off the page again just to make it really pull this round into position a little bit more. Make a sharp bend outwards, grip it near the loop. You can see I'm doing that. Flare the wire outwards, and then it's not quite right, so what I'm going to do is just make that bend a little, reshape it. So that's what you can do, just reshape the bend. Grip here near where you want to shape it, and then shape the rest of it with your finger, pulling the wire around, and I've made the other side of the loop. So I'm gripping the wire near the base of the loop here, and I just want to turn the page a little bit so here I made the 2 loops, you see, and I'm going to turn the page so you can see this outside section here. I'm going to turn it outwards with a sharp little bend, a little wiggly bend here and here. You just need to reshape it a few times because it will want to just to distort itself. You can see that bit's distorted, so I'm going to go back, reshape that into that little wiggle here. That's the edge of the crown. Another sharp bend here, and I would just clamp either side of that bend just to sharpen it up. So I'm going to just, once I know it's in the right place over the diagram, that's why the diagram is so helpful, clamp, clamp either side. And this is not straight, this is at an angle. You see that angle here, that's not quite in the right place, so I'm going to reshape it. Another clamp, there we go, clamp there, and then pull this around to make this loop. So I'm gripping near it where I want to make the shape, and out, pulling it out over the dotted line on the diagram. So we've done half this crown shape, and I'm going to come back. You need to do the other side in the mirror image, and I'll show you that in a moment. So I've worked on the other side of the crown in exactly the same way we did the left hand side, and we can put this to one side and move on to making the next frame. We're now going to make the central detail frame using 25 centimetres of 1mm wire, using the green line on the diagram. So taking round nose pliers, grip near the centre of the wire and then near the tips of the pliers, and pull the wire round with your fingers to form a little loop. Check against the diagram, you can make this smaller or bigger if you like, and then just grip near the base of the loop and flare the wire out by pulling it around with your fingers. Flare the wire out sharply on either side to form that top loop with a sharp bend outwards and upwards on either side. And there we've got that top loop made. I'm just going to form one side. So again, bend upwards a little bit more using the diagram as a guide. I'm going to start forming the loop with a little pull downwards, and then insert the round nose pliers again into position near the base of the loop and pull the wire around to form this side loop. So using a fairly similar technique. Grip near the base of the loop again with the chain nose pliers. Flare the wire outwards and then place over the diagram, which I'm going to turn to help me shape a bit more easily. And I'm going to start making this diamond shape at the top with little tiny bends and manipulations of the chain nose pliers just to help me shape down the side of this diamond shape. Flare outwards to form a little semicircle, and then you're just making lots of wiggly shapes along the base of the crown. Lots of little wiggly shapes. You can see how I'm doing that. There we are, lots of little wiggly shapes, gripping near where I want to bend the wire, take it out over the dotted line and then use flush cutter pliers to cut it at that little line at the end. And that's half the shape made, and you just need to make the other shape, the other side, in mirror image. So here it is, made with the other side done. Now we're going to make the crown band using the purple line. It's not so easy to distinguish, but if you can see this frame already made sitting over you, you'll at least know where it goes. So use the natural curve of the wire and use about 12 to 14 centimetres length of 1mm wire, and use the middle section of the wire and put the curve downwards like so. And then this is basically fairly simple. You're just going to make lots of little clumpy movements round according to the diagram and upwards. Now spend a bit of time. These need clamping and shaping, so I'm going to go back to this and just clamp either side of the bends just to sharpen them up and make sure they're in the right place. Again, I just want to make sure this angle's outwards, not straight up, so it's not a straight up thing. I'm just going to make sure that angles like so. Like so. Another clamp here. You see, there we go. I'm just going to trim that according to, sorry, I'm in the way, trim that according to the length here, and just make the other side in mirror image just like so, just so it fits inside this purple, inside the blue lines. This template, just the pink line is just the inside of the blue line, so just make sure that fits into place there. We next need to make these two little side details from 10 centimetre lengths of 0.8mm wire. I'm just going to show you how to sort of initiate and start making one of them. So 10 centimetre of wire, work near in the middle section of the wire and just pull the wire around the round nose pliers to make a little loop, and you can then place it over the diagram and adjust the size. And this is very similar to the loops on the crown detail frame. So gripping near where you want that loop flared outwards, you just grip with the chain nose plier tips and use your fingers to pull the wire, flare the wire out. on either side. The reshape over the diagram. You can see this fits nicely. Wiggle, wiggle, wiggle around to make this another little hemicircle here. Bend outwards over the dotted line and cut with flush cutter pliers over the dotted line. And the same wiggle here. And making these little hemicircles here. So you made a circle and a hemicircle. And round, this one's a little bit shorter, and then cut that. You just need to make exactly the same on the other side in mirror image. And that's all the frames made. Now we've got all the frames made, we need to curl and hammer them. I'm just going to show you how to curl the wildtails now. You can study these to see the direction of the curls and the sizing. You can use the template also to help you size them correctly. So I'm just going to show you the end of this crown detail, taking some round nose pliers, grip near the end of the wildtail and start to make a little tan curl. Then use flush cutter pliers to cut the work hard and straight end off. Because it looks like a P and won't curl properly. And now reinsert the round nose pliers, holding near where you want to turn with one hand and then rotating the pliers with the other hand to make the little loose curl. You can see how I'm doing that. I'm just moving the fingers along a little bit. Then use the diagram just to help you shape the curl properly, gripping near where you, just not at the actual curl itself, near where you want to turn and just turning it into shape over the diagram. So I'll come back to you when they're all curled and we can do some hammering. You can see the orientation of these curls just before I hammer them. I've used the diagram to help me. This set of curls sits at the top here. These two in mirror image with a slightly longer curl at the top, just like that. And then mirror image, and these curls are curled downwards. And again, the green line will help you place where the curls need to go. Right, moving on to the hammering. I'm just going to use a little small face hammer on the steel block to hammer certain sections, and the small face hammer helps you direct to small sections and not over other sections that you don't want to hammer. So here's the central crown detail frame. I'm going to hammer along the curly whirly bit at the bottom, hammering that side only. And then the top loops, but you don't hammer the rest of it, and any hammer marks will appear on this side, so this will be the front of the piece. For the crown frame, you need to hammer along these curly whirly bits at the top and only the loops, but not the rest of it. For the crown detail frame, you need to hammer just the top loops and not the rest of it. And for these little side detail frames, you just need to hammer in mirror image these end curls, but not the rest of it. We're now going to add some beads into the crown, and it's pretty similar technique across the whole piece. But I've got an 8/0 bead threaded onto 60 centimeters 0.25 millimeter wire at the base of one of the loops in the crown, and I'm just going to wrap the 0.25 millimeter wire on one side around the loop and then work with the other side now that that side is anchored in place. So I'm going to thread through the 0.25 millimeter wire through the bead. You need to thread through about 2 or 3 times if you can, just to help it stay in place a bit more easily. I'm only going to do it twice today for time. And then what I'm going to do is wrap this wire that I'm working with above the bead once and below the bead once, just to help it anchor in place, and then start to wrap along the side. And I'll come back to you when we're ready to add in the pearl. I'm just going to show you the technique of wrapping round frames. Just wrap around the frame like so. You can see me just holding the frame with one hand and just pulling the wire around and just making sure the wraps are nice and neat and even until you get to the midpoint of the widest point here where you're ready to add a pearl in. I'll come back to you when we're ready to do that. So I've wrapped around the lobe so it's pretty near the widest point here, and you can just make sure the wraps are tightly compressed with a little push of fingernails. Make sure they're nice and neat and lie side by side. I've threaded one of the round pearls onto one of the 0.25mm of wire, and then I'm going to thread the other 0.25mm wire in through the other side of the pearl. This is what I call a crisscross bead attachment. I'm just going to put it slowly and gently into place, and just catch any loops or tangles as they form, and just avoid them, and put it slowly into place into the loop, like so. And then I'm going to carry on wrapping down this lobe until I'm ready to attach more beads, and I'll come back to you at that point. So here you can see I've added the pearl in here, and I've added an 8/0, a 3mm, and another 8/0 with another crisscross attachment near the base of that lobe. Don't cut any of these wires, you'll need them for later stages. I've just beaded up two of these side lobes here, and we just need to cut this end wire here close to the frame with flush cutter pliers on the inside edge, and smooth the cut end down with a gentle rolling motion of the chain nose pliers tips so there's no sharp edge. Run your hand over the wire so you don't catch it. Leave the other two wires. We're going to, three wires. Then we're going to work with the central two either side of the side lobes here, and we're going to add beads into this little space between the crown. And also you can see I've added just one 3mm crystal and one 8/0 to this lobe because it's a bit smaller. So first of all, thread on an 8/0 to one of the wires, pass the other wire through in this sort of crisscross bead attachment, and then we're going to just very gently, as we pull this bead into place, we're just going to settle it in between the lobes here, pulling it into place. And in fact, what I might do is just thread this through to help this pop it into the right place. Thread it into the lobe, to the side, on this side of this lobe, and pull that into position. And this a little bit further up, you see it helps pull the bead into position above the base of that lobe, and again round that side here through, and gently pull it so you don't get any tangles. Pull it into place. You can see it now will sit into place between the two. You can wrap it once here around this lobe if you want to, but for speed I'm just going to bring this up in between the lobe a little bit further along. I did wrap once around the lobe frame either side. It's a little bit fiddly and takes a bit of time for the demonstration. Please try and do that if you can. Again, another bead added in, threading it in, and just before you quite get it so tightly in position, just again I'm going to thread it above that pearl attachment, but not quite at the top yet, sort of just above where that pearl is attached into the lobe. Can you see that point there? Pull that into position. And the same for here. Might go a little, actually, do you know what, it might be better just below it. Pop it in below that pearl attachment, so I think it's going to fit into the space better. Trim off any threads if they get ragged. By the way, any ragged ends are difficult to thread through. Can you see now this has come into position nicely as the next one up. I'm going to continue beading up with another bead added in the same way for the longer demo. And for the longer demo, I'm just going to sort of show you that last bead going in. That last bead going in that way. So you can see me threading on the 8/0, and we're going to head on into the top. You could easily add in a larger crystal to this spot here because it's a wider gap. I'm just working with a minimal amount of components so you don't end up with too expensive, a list of components. But you could always add in a 6/0 seed bead or a crystal and a slightly larger shape, different colour, all that sort of thing into this area. It'd be amazing. So I pulled that into place just above the other the beads in the row. I'm just going to pull this into place here. There we go. And then you can hear the wire clicking into place in the wraps in position. So that's what you want to do really, have the wraps hidden in place. You can hear a little tiny click. And then wrap a couple of times around the top. There we go, on either side. The last thread has got to be through the lobe if you can, so it's on the inside edge because that's where you want to trim it. So I'm going to pull it through and then turn the piece over, pull it quite close to the frame, trim it near the edge with flush cutter pliers, and then smooth that wire down so there's no sharp edge. So you can see me gripping and smoothing it down. You should barely be able to see these wraps amongst the 0.25 wraps already in place. Again, just at the top here, I'm just going to click this into place. You can hear that click again, threading it through a couple of times. Click it into place amongst the wraps already there, and finish with the wire on the inside edge to the back. I've done 3 wraps round, click into place, put it into place so you can't see the wraps there at all. Flush cutter to the inside edge, really in deep there into the recess there, and smooth any cut ends down so there's nothing to catch on the skin. Run your fingers over, and that's ready. I'm just going to go and do the other side. Leave this wire here, don't cut it. I'm going to do the other side and then come back to that. So here is the crown frame beaded up for the minute. We've got 2 wires left right in the centre, and everything else has been trimmed away. So put that to one side again for the moment, and we're going to go through adding in beads to the other components. For the cross frame, there's a little bit of detail here at the top, which is a bit sort of, I suppose you just got to know the right order of things, but the rest is pretty simple. It's the same as the crisscross bead attachments or everything else. So what we need to do is just add in an 8/0 bead to the top, very similar way, a very similar way that we added the bead at in the crown, just at the base of this loop here. Again, pass the wire through. I've used about 1 metre, by the way, of 0.25mm wire for this, just so that because we will need to work along the base with it. But if you want to work with a shorter wire and add in more at the base later on, that's absolutely fine. It doesn't matter. So I've gone through this 3 times, and I want to wrap around the. I'm not going to wrap either side of the bead, but I'm just going to wrap around the base of the frame just here, and then I'm just going to add in a crystal to the center. So I'm just going to thread on a 3mm crystal to one of the wires, crisscross attachment, this one again. But what we're going to do is, I suppose, a similar way to adding into the crown, in the sort of the sides of the lobes. I'm actually going to pull the wire into the center, but then wrap around this base here, just below, sort of where I came from, I suppose, just below the bead. So a wrapping around once here on either side. Now we can start to add in some 8/0s around the side. So I'm going to add in one to this side lobe. I brought in the wire behind the lobe first of all, because it's just a bit easier actually, just because it's passing over the lobe when you wrap it on. And I'm just going to wrap to the side of this bead with a wrap here, and another one through. And then what I'm going to do is just make sure this wire ends up at the base below the 8mm bead. I'm just going to add on the other one in the same way. I've got the beads added in all around the lobes, to the side and to the top, with both 0.25mm wires exiting or being sort of coming out just below the 3mm bead. I'm going to attach another 8/0 with the crisscross bead attachment. There we go, pulling it tight into place. You can see how I constantly just holding that little loop, or just making sure there's no kinks in that loop. Pull it tight into place, push it up into position just below the bead, so we've got as much room below this level as possible. If you feel there's not enough room, use a smaller bead, but we need to make sure the pearl fits into this place. You can always make this space bigger and widen around it, or use a smaller pearl. So I'm going to wrap around either side of this area here, and then wrap along until I reach the outer the corners here. I'm just going to check the pearl fits. I'm going to just change the shape of this a little bit, because I want a pearl just to fit into place. I'm just going to adjust this downwards and make it a bit sort of, I suppose, longer and wider, so this will fit into place. I wanted a diamond here, or a shape, but you can always make it a big round if you like to fit around a pearl. It's up to you. Right, I'm going to come back to this point here, ready to attach the next pearl. Here you can see I've reached the widest point of that little diamond shape, and I've used the 0.25mm wires to thread on an 8/0, a little pearl and another 8/0, and I'm going to pull them tight into position so it sits right in the center of that little diamond shape, and make sure you pull that wire as you wrap right back. Hold the pearls into place actually as you pull them into position. Hold the beads into place and right back to that corner so you haven't got a gap, and it means it holds it into place. Again, on the other side, we just turn the piece, pull the little wire in the crisscross attachment, and then pull this right up so that it sits at that corner, and then wrap along down. I'm going to add in loads of beads with crisscross attachment in the same way, and I'll show you when we finish that, and I'll talk through it. So I added in beads to this central component here. We got onto this space here, adding in the 8/0 and the pearl to this point, and I wrapped on down, adding 3 more 8/0s, and then wrapped down to the center of this point here, this space, and added in 3mm diamonds of crystal, making sure I pinch tight. You can see how I pinch tight as I pull the attachment into place to make sure there's not too much of a gap as I pull that into place. Then I wrapped on down to the base there, and left these wires for use later on. And then I added in beads to these little crown side components, or wiggly things, about 1 meter of wire that you need, wrap of 0.25mm wire. I wrapped around the end, I don't know whether you can see, wrapped around the end here, and put a crisscross attachment of an 8/0, wrapped on down, put another 8/0 with a crisscross attachment, and then wrapped each wire tail down so to the start of these curly tails, and these will be ready to attach things later, attach the pieces together in the next step. So don't cut any of these wire tails, you'll need these for attachments. Okay, so we've got all the components with beads added in, and we're ready to start attaching them together in the next steps. To start to attach the pieces together, I've placed the crown sort of band inside the crown frame, and you can see that you just need to make sure that this bit is as diagonal or parallel to this side as you can, and just adjust this if it's slipped out of place. So once you've got this frame adjusted, just take it off from the main crown frame for a minute, and just place one of the little curly details over the side here, or the side of one of the sides, like so, and just wrap the top wire around the frame here, and the curl just twice here, or maybe 3 times, just to make sure you've attached it all together. So push this down. I want to leave a gap in the middle, so because I want to be able to fit the main detail in place, the main sort of central focal detail frame in later on, so you don't want these too near the midline. So I've got that one attached there. I'm going to attach the lower section in the same way, and I'm also going to attach the other curly detail frame into place on the other side, and then come back to you. So you can see I've attached all the 4 wires from these 2 components to this band frame, leaving these wire tails, and we're going to use them to attach them to the crown frame now. Oops. So I'm going to go and pop this over the crown and start to attach it in place. I'm going to start to attach the sections together. So place the band as close as you can up to the top of the base of these little lobes. And this is the fiddly bit. And once you start joining things together, it will be better. Put some of these wires out of the way, and you're just working with the upper 0.25mm wires on this side of the crown detail, and just start to wrap around both frames on either side, and make sure this band fits inside the rest of the crown. And as you start to cinch things into place, it will happen. So a few wraps here, and then you can wrap. I want to push this so the curl is out of the way. Push this up and wrap around the top, around just the band frame. Sorry, it's such a long piece of wire, get in the way. Trim ragged bits of wire if they get too ragged, because I can see, look, this is ragged, so I'm going to just trim this, push it back up into place. See if everything goes over the place for a minute, but it will work. It will work. So keep on wrapping just around this point here, around both frames, and then I'm going to do this a few more times for the short video, and then just talk you through this section here. But for the longer video, I'm just going to carry on. So I'm going to wrap around this top section a few times, around this corner. Again, make sure that this section, it started to overlap, so make sure that you push it over so it sits inside. I've used the pliers just to click it into place a bit more. So I don't want it sitting on top of it or overlapping. I need it to be away from that, and also I need to pull these down a bit so that out of the midline, and I've got a clearer view of this corner. Then you see what I've done. I pulled it out, and you can see that corner, and that was easier. So you need at least 4 or 5 wraps here. There we go. Now I'm just going to wrap along the upper section. I put this all down carefully of this curl. You can see how easy it is. You just wrap, wrap, wrap like that, and then I'm going to do this until I reach the widest point of this hemicircular frame. I need to make sure the wire is, because it's passing away from the frame, I need to pass it to the back of the frame so I can bring it up. Just press everything together. This is in the way. I can't trim wires because I still want to make the piece up, but if in a demo on the screen I would have gone and trim those away, but not because you need them. Don't trim them away. So I've threaded up into this little space here and caught this little hemisphere just in here, and I'm going to bind these two bits together. So this is starting to catch and bind this to this. Okay, I'm going to do it again. So again, bring the wire down in between on this side of this little curl frame here, on the top of the detail, the band frame. I'm going to get all the frames wrong around. Up into this little eye space. This is good space to thread through. Put it up so it's quite close to that crisscross attachment of the 8/0 bead, and pull it around, and you've got started to get this attached into place. You can see how this is wibbly wobbly all over the place here, but this is now attaching into place here. So I'll do that once more, although 2 attachments are probably okay. You could do a third, so I'll do it more in case it slipped out of screen you couldn't see. I'm going to again thread this 0.25mm wire up in this tiny space next to this 8/0 bead on the inside edge of it. Pull the wire up so it almost clicks into place, and then wrap around. I'm actually going to carry on wrapping along here, and I'm almost at a spot where you can see where there's a little base of a lobe, so I'm going to attach that as well. So I'm going to wrap to that too, wrap along here, and I think I can just attach now to this space here. And I'm just going to manipulate this so that it's to this inside edge of this pearl. And then now I've got that there, and I've got a bit of space now. I can wrap around, pushing this all together. No, because I pushed this back with my fingernail, I'm going to do a few more wraps along this, because you don't want too many gaps. You want a nice neat wrap along here. So I've just pushed this into position, got these wraps together, and actually I've got to do a few more wraps along. There, wrap, 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 and then we're just there. I'm ready to thread through the base of this lobe. Again, this wire's a bit raggedy. I could do with the trim, but I'm going to try it. Base this lobe there, put it into place. Back up into the tiny space here. I'm not quite ready to wrap to that next hemisphere, so I'm going to stick to just wrapping around the crown band. Sorry, I'll get it in the end there, and back into that base again. So I'm going to do that a few more times and travel on up until I get to this end curl. I'll just talk to you through with what I've done. So we're back in a few moments. So you can see I've wrapped along the corner here, wrapped along and also wrapped around this side of the detail here, then wrapped along this curl, and also then attached to the side lobe here, the base, wrapped along, attached to the side of this little section here, and then wrapped along to the end and leaving the wire tail. So you need those wire tails for later. So I've attached the little sides into place on the crown detail frame, but there's a little bit of reshaping. Also there's loads of wire tails, but keep them in place, you will need them. So there's 4 wire tails at the top, 2 at the side. I'm just going to reshape that because we do need to be able to fit in that main central bit. So I'm just reshaping that, making that a bit more curvy because these are a little bit smaller, so it doesn't matter about bringing this up to being a little bit more curvy and to fit into this area like that. That makes it quite a nice crown shape. and press this into position. So I've got everything pressed this out, everything fits into position I think now, and I've given myself a little bit more space at the base here for it all to fit in together. So now we're going to fit on the main central detail. So to attach the designs together, I've reshaped this area. I'm going to place that central detail so it sits in between everything here, and I'm just going to do a little bit of attachment here at this point. So here we are. I'm just going to bind on a 3mm bead with a crisscross bead attachment. Fiddly, sorry about that. Just going to actually take off the design and just pop the 2 wires through a 3mm bead. Just place it right at the base of this, right at the base of this little shape. I know it fits into place. That at least I check that. Now I'm going to place it over the design. Just make sure you just tuck all the wires out of the way. These wires come down to the base, and the 4 wires at the top are out of the way. I need this sitting into place. Now, when we actually slot this into place, I just want to actually do a little thing just to help me sit, sort of make it detailed. So I'm going to put this little curl underneath that side curl there, and this little curl underneath that side detail there, and it starts to lock this into place. And just make sure everything's sort of flat. So I'm going to press things flat, and now I'm just going to bind around this, just in quite a similar way that we did with the other pieces. I'm going to actually make this next attachment coming out of the crisscross attachment to this central area here, and then bind around. You can bind around both frames at this point if you like, actually, and this one too, so it's keep it as central as possible. There we go, that's it, nice and central. Bind around here. Right, because my wires aren't as long as I'd like them to be, I'm going to use a new bit of wire to bind along this central, this piece here. So I'm actually going to get rid of, you can see I bound twice here, but I'm going to get rid of one of these wires, and I can tuck that up underneath here, perhaps, wrap once and get rid of that one, and then I'm going to use the other one. So I'll just get rid of that. Little clip close without cutting everything else. Close onto the bead as possible so its cut end is hidden away. Then I'm going to use the other wire just to do a little tiny bit of basket weaving. So I'm going to wrap once around this side, bring the wire up over the top of this section here on the other side, wrap once, bring it up in, wrap it round, wrap again, bring it up into the central. So the wire passing from the back of the piece is going to go over the front of this next section on the other side, wrap twice. You see, like a figure of 8, wrap twice, like a figure of 8, wrap twice. So I'm just going to get rid of that now. So let's just stabilize that base now. Now I'm just going to turn the piece over, cut here, and smooth that down. Now we're going to add a new piece of wire in to this base here, so I'll come back to you when I'm ready to do that. I'm going to add a new section of wire, and I've used about 80 centimetres really, and I'm just going to thread the wire through this bead, but I'm not going to do it the first time. There we go. Use pliers to grab ends of wire if you can't catch them with your fingers. So I'm just going to grab that little bit of wire with my pliers, that's right, and put it through so that it's sitting, the midsection of wire is sitting or the bead is sitting at the midsection of the wire. Sorry, I just got to make sure I'm working the right bit of wire. Get these, pull these out of the way. I don't need a minute, but don't cut them. So I'm going to work with one end of the wire and start to wrap along this section here. I'll meet you when I reach the end of that section to let you know what to do. I'm just going to catch this section here, wrap and wrap here. I see a few wraps there. It starts to stabilise this lower section. Just make sure that it's you're putting it into place. Oops, a bit fiddly sometimes. You can do this with pliers actually. Just slightly bend. Just be careful not to mark it downwards, so that you've got top edge and bottom edge touching nicely. I've done 3 or 4 wraps there, and now I'm going to just wrap along the bottom edge, making sure the wraps are closely together. And I'll come back to you when we do this section in the middle here, because it's quite nice to see the technique of what you do. Right, I've wrapped until I've got to, I suppose, a nice section here, ready where these 2 wireframes touch against each other. And I'm just going to wrap carefully along around both frames. And you just make sure with this little technique that you've got to make sure that both frames are fairly parallel to each other, not overlapping, but it's not the end of the world, just as long as they're the same on both sides, and so it looks balanced. And sometimes you just got to work with what you've got with it when it all fits together, because it's a complex shape and you're relying on getting that that template to get either here to this point, but it does, without very little reshaping, does get you to that point. But you can see how parallel these are. And just before you finish, or when you finish that section, I think about 8 or 9 around that section will do. Oh, I don't know, I've got about 6 or 7, haven't I, actually? There we go. And then when you finish that little area, when they start to diverge again, just wrap around that base frame, and you can just do a tiny little squeeze on that wrap just to flatten it all without too much pressure, otherwise you'll break the wire. I'm going to go along to the end and meet you there and show you what to do. When you get to this point, also wrap around this curly wire tail here to make sure this loop gets caught into place. And this bit makes this loop really secure, and you should end up with your wire just at the top here. I'm just going to get an 8/0 bead, and we're going to wrap it around this section here, and it hides all sorts of sins here. If there's anything that doesn't quite match or doesn't quite fit together, you can hide it with a bead. Awful to say, but it does help. So wrap around this corner here and this side curl, and make sure you pass the wire through the bead at least 3 or 4 times. And you can also wrap either side of the bead as well if you want to, in a similar way you did at the top of these little lobes, just to help secure it into place, because it's sitting on top of an area and it might just need that little wrap either side to help secure it into place. And when you're done, just wrap along the curl underneath one of these other curls, wrap along this side curl here, underneath one of these curls so it's out of sight, then cut and tuck this wire end in. So you'll be able to start getting rid of some of these wires now, which is great. To get rid of some of the wires, which is fantastic. So I'll do that, and then and also do the other side as well. I'll come back to you at that point. So we're now going to use these 2 side wires here, and keeping the 4 top wires out of the way. I'm just going to use this side wire on one side and wrap on an 8/0 seed bead around these 2 curls here. Now wherever I started, I think I can just wrap it in between. So I thread it through here, this area here, and wrap it. You can see it starting to pull together a little bit. I can just possibly bring it up in between this little area here, just make it difficult for myself, but or I could wrap it between these 2 curls. It might make it easier for everybody who's not going onto this straight into this bottom edge here, and again wrap twice through this, maybe 3 times, and wrap either side of it if you can, just to stabilize it, and I'll come back to you. I'm then just basically going to wrap along this lower edge in the same way that we did all this wrapping here. We're just going to wrap to all these areas where they touch and finish up at this point here, and don't cut the wire tail because we're going to use that in, for the next step after that. So I'll come back to you when I've done that. This is about the most fiddly sort of section because you've got to thread through small spaces and use pliers to help you pull the wire through, but you can see where I'm threading through maybe a larger space and pulling to make it easier on myself, where there's still spaces that aren't attached. You can just make it easier on yourself. You can see I'm threading through this section here and then gently pulling back the wire towards this area here where I actually want to wrap. This makes it a bit easier, and obviously once these sections start to be attached you can't do that anymore, but you know, just speeds things up for you. So I'm going to carry on doing all this and come back to you when I've got to the midsection on both sides. Basically you can see here that I just need to adjust this area when I get to this area by pulling everything together. You might need a little push of the pliers to make it easier that when you bind to this area that there's not a gap. Okay, so again I'll meet you at the end in a minute. So I've worked with the wires to the lower edge of this side curl here and bound on an 8/0 bead to either side, and then worked along the lower edge, also binding to the curly detail and the wiggly detail on the side, and along the lower edge binding to the curly detail here, and then to that little loop there, and then worked along to the edge here. And I've done edge of the central midline on either side. I've done that on both sides, and what I'm going to do is add in an 8/0 seed bead with a crisscross bead wrap after also binding around this edge, because we're going to start to bind this central midline detail here. So bind once or twice here, then add in an 8/0 with a crisscross wrap, and then bind either side, and I'll come back to you when I've done that. I'm going to show you the attachment here. So I'm going to bind these 0.25mm wires that you're working with a couple of times around the midline of the central detail, because that will start to attach it into place at this section, because at the moment it's only attached at the bottom, isn't it? So bring the wire up on either side of this central detail. Do the same on the other side. So quickly do that. You see I'm just attaching around here. Now the wrap will make it, you can do 3 wraps, it really doesn't matter, because you're going to start to hide some detail in place. You can see this little space. You could add a much larger bead into this space if you wanted to, or even a pal. It would work quite well. So now I'm just going to bring in an 8/0 seed bead and thread it onto one of the 0.25mm wires, and the other one goes through it. Pull tightly. We want this to sit below the 3mm bead in that section, so we just want to sit it into here. Okay, so I'm just going to wrap back around this side and then into this hemisphere and wrap to the side of the bead, so it just helps stabilize it in place. Do that a couple of times, then find a spot, probably in this little section here, to wrap around a few times and cut and tuck this section in. So I'll come back to you when that's done. Obviously you've got to attach the other side in the same way. So you can see I've attached an 8/0 bead with a crisscross wrap here, wrapped a few times with these 0.25mm wires around this section here, and then around these little side wires here, just so they're tucked out of the way, and then cut and tuck these wires in. So you can see it started to come together as a crown design now. So we're now going to start working with the top wires, so we can add some more beads in. We're going to work with these longer wires at the top of the crown, and we're just going to find a spot just to bind them in, just work out where they come from. Okay, I'm going to thread them up through. I'm going to bend these little curls forward a little bit, just get them out of the way because I don't want them quite in the way at the moment. And I'm going to just bind around the base of this lobe and the in between the second and the third tomatoes, just there, just at the base there, where you've got a space in between them, and bind that round a few times on either side. You see, bind it round a few times on either side, and then find a spot to cut and tuck in. Sorry, to wrap this. I think maybe twice is enough. 3 times would add a bit more strength, but we've got quite a lot of attachments between the pieces. I think if you're going to use this as an attachment point, I think give it a bit more of an attachment here. So I maybe do another one because it's going to be under a lot of it may be a bit more sort of tension than if we're using these side struts, and you don't, or side loops for attachments, you don't need to maybe make such an attachment here. But anyway, so we've got that, and I'm just 3 times here. I'm going to do the same on the other side, but I'm just going to cut and tuck this wire in after a couple of wraps around this side lobe, and I'll come back to you when I've done that. So we've attached those top wires in place and secured the top of the section of the crown together by wrapping around at this point. Press those wires back into place, these little cowls, because you would have had to move them to make these attachments, and you do that with your fingers. And now we're going to use these wires here just to bind around to this midsection with some 8/0 beads. So I'm just going to do it on one side I'm just going to do this on one side, and then we'll just to show you what I mean, and wrap around a couple of times here. Just going to thread onto here and then wrap to that midsection, and then wrap. Can you see where you just trap that bead into place, and then thread back through. Make sure you thread through the bead several times, wrap either side, and find a spot. Oh no, and then I should think that's pretty much fine. Don't cut and tuck a wire just yet. So you can see I passed the wire through this bead a few times and wrapped from this curl to the central midline, and I want to maybe wrap once more through this bead, but what I'm going to do is just bring the wire inside this curl to make sure it sits just to the side of this hemicircle. I'll be back with you in a moment when I've added a bead into the other side. So I've wrapped on an 8/0 bead to the other side, and just make sure that both curls are symmetrical and both beads are symmetrical. Make sure the piece looks symmetrical. Anything you can always just pull out, maybe a little curl here or there, just to make sure things look balanced curls and things like that. And the very last thing you've got to do is just add in an 8/0 bead to this center, so it sits above the crystal in the center of that space there. So you've got one above and one below that you've added in, but this one is going to sit above it. So I'm just going to do loads and loads of crisscross attachments. They just add strength with a 0.25mm wire, and just pull this into place. This is the one you just got to make sure sits centrally, and then you can either wrap around the curls again or just wrap around the side. Cut and tuck this in, and then we'll come back and have a look at the finished piece and any final things that we need to do. What I'm doing with this little central bead, this is for the long video, is just wrapping either side just to make sure that it stays central. If you don't feel it fits into the space properly, just get a bigger bead to fit into this place. But again, this should be all right. I'm just going to put another wrap in on that side just to help it stay central. And also I'm going to press that 3mm bead through from the back, so it just sits a little bit more frontward. Just going to get rid of that there. So just make sure you can press this with the handles of your pliers, just so it sits forward a little way. Okay, so that's one thing you can do. Sorry if this goes out of focus. I'm having to shoot in the dark. It's a winter's night and I'm having to do this at short notice, so everything's a little bit dark, so forgive me. But you can see that's central. That bead has got to be moved over a little bit so that it's central. If you're not happy with it, reattach it in place so that's in a better position. I just need to make sure that sits properly. What I can do, I can always use this wire because I've got it here, just to come back through, a bit like seed beading, coming back through the frame and strengthening the attachment of a seed bead in place on a wire frame. So I just want to make sure, because I've moved it about a bit, that wire, because we're using 0.25mm wire, just hides away nicely, helps that bead sit into place with a bit more strength. That's lovely. So let's have a look at everything. Just get that out of the way now. We can get rid of all the wires and the crown will be finished. You can see you've got all these lovely loops. I'll talk about it in a minute because I've got to do a sum up for both videos, the short and the long. So back within a minute with a little sum up. So I'm just cutting and tucking that in quite close into frame. Just want to make that sit into place. There we go, that's it. So that's a little bit of pressure there, helps that sit into place centrally. Anything else? So what am I not happy about? I just want to make sure that this looks symmetrical. I can just make this, let's have a look. This can be made bigger with a little expansion. Should really do this before you do all the attachments in place, but because I'm having to do this, there we are, that's a bit better. Just a little tweak just to make sure that's symmetrical. You can make this crown 3D if you like, but I'm going to keep it fairly 2D. You've got all these loops for attachment, which are fantastic. You've got loops attachment here and here, and you can then get that let that sit into place with attachment here. You can attach things, press it into place. Everything looks okay. There we go. And so here we go. I'm going to zoom out a little bit so you can see the finished item here with the bee attached to it. And let's go zooming in a little bit so you can see. And there's the crown ready to be used as a component. Everyone's going to be slightly different because you can never get frames complete the same, but I've done a pretty good match. They should all fit together. Minor adjustments are needed sometimes, as you can see, just to sort of get things to fit. But there's your crown component ready to use. I do hope you enjoy making these designs and that you combine them perhaps with this lovely golden bee from my booklet, adding in this crown to the design. And please tag me on Facebook when you do make these designs, so because I'd love to see what you make. If you have any problems, please get back to me with maybe a stage photo if you get stuck and you can't quite understand what I did. So please get back to me and I'll be happy to help. Rachel Norris, jewellery designer, on Facebook, and JM guest designer Rachel Norris as well on Facebook. All right, take care then. I hope you enjoy making this little component, and goodbye.